Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy, Jimmy Wong. Welcome to the Command Zone podcast. And on this very special episode, yeah, you read the description correctly and the title. I'm going to be going through all 11 of my current commander decks. That's right, I have 11 right now. Used to be more, but I've toned it down a little bit. And I'm also going to be ranking them in terms of my favorite decks, the decks I'm going to keep around forever, and the decks that I may be more likely to switch out and swap out. There was a ton of excitement over the last time we did this episode with Rachel's decks, so we thought we'd continue the trend. And of course, you're going to find out all about my collection and what I've got going on, what I've got brewing on today's show. But before we get into it, let's talk about our sponsors. CardKingdom.com/command is the first one up. That is the place to go if you're looking to buy Magic products, sealed, single products, whatever you're looking for Magic-wise. CardKingdom.com/command probably has it in stock. They have a huge warehouse, great customer service, and they ship everything to you in one convenient package so that when you get your cards, you can just rip open that package, put those cards into sleeves, and get playing. I'm going to be talking about a lot of different cards today across all 11 of my decks, as well as you're going to have the ARCHIDEKT links for all of them in the show notes below. So if you hear a card that you're interested in, go ahead, click on the deck link. You can check out what is in the deck. You can even check out the different versions of it, and then head on over to cardkingdom.com/command and get the one that you want in the quality that you want as well. And of course, when you get those cards, you're going to want to keep them protected. So check out our other sponsor, ULTRAPRO.com/command. Every single one of these deck boxes I have in front of me, as well as the sleeves of my decks, are Ultra Pro sleeves. They have been the best in the business, and they're the ones that Josh and I trust our personal collection to. I've sleeved up a lot of cards over the years, and I'm confident that I love Ultra Pro the most because, one, they're always coming out with new and better sleeves with their new technology, but also some of the sleeves I have on these cards are ones I've had on since the beginning. We're talking years and years of play now, and they hold up just great. So if you're looking to make a great investment with your money in terms of investing into products that are going to keep your products safe, ultrapro.com/command is the place to go. And finally, our last sponsor is the direct way to sponsor the show and support the show at patreon.com/commandzone. And the supporters and the sponsors are you, the people out there that want to support our content. They love what they see with Game Nights, Extra Turns. In fact, they get to watch every episode of Game Nights and Extra Turns a day earlier than the general public without ads, as well as get involved with our Discord community if they so choose. We have an amazing community on there where Josh, myself, and other members of the office answer your questions on a daily basis. And as well, you can just talk to the other people there, get advice for your deck, or just hang out, play some spell table games, you name it. We also have tons of extra awesome content up the Patreon tiers, so make sure you check all that stuff out, including exclusive videos that only patrons at select tiers can access. And they get access to every exclusive video we've ever released. So it's a great deal. Check it out, patreon.com/commandzone. And of course, we shout out one lucky patron every single episode. So this specific episode of all 11 of Jimmy Wong's decks is dedicated to Brad Ezel. Brad, you rock. All right, let's get right into it. So the format for how we talk about all of these decks is going to be the same. First, I will talk about the commander of the deck, and then we're going to break down the plan of the deck, what it wants to do, the cornerstone cards of the deck that really make it tick and work, a pet card or a card that I think is like special to me, which may not synergize perfectly with the deck, but I just had to have it in there. Rachel calls it her weirdo card. And then any sort of combos the deck can do. And then finally, a ranking of the deck from S tier, which means I'm going to keep this deck around forever. I'm never, ever going to take it apart, all the way down to F tier, which is there's a high chance this deck gets torn apart, reassembled pretty darn soon. And of course, I'm also going to be talking about some of the new cards I've added into the decks recently, so you can sort of see where my head's at when I look at recent sets and what cards I want to put in there. All right, let's kick things off with my very first deck we're going to talk about today. And by the way, we're not doing these in order of S to F. We are just going to do them across the board, and where they land is where they land. So you may be waiting to the very last deck to see an S tier deck. Who knows? The suspense is already killing me. All right, first up, we have Kykar Wind's Fury. This is a Jeska deck. Kykar is 1 red, a blue, and a white for a legendary creature bird wizard. It's a 3/3 with flying, and it says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. You can also sacrifice a spirit to add red mana. So this is a very powerful commander. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it across the table from you. The plan is pretty simple, right? Cast non-creature spells, create a bunch of 1/1 white spirit tokens, and then from there you can sacrifice them for more mana to cast more spells and make more tokens, or you can pump out the damage. Now, in this deck's case, I chose a very specific direction where I wanted to actually put out many, many tiny little creatures. And so cards like Young Pyromancer, which pumps out 1/1s, and Monastery Mentor, which pumps out 1/1 white monk creature tokens with prowess every time you cast a non-creature spell for Monastery Mentor, is the way that this deck really gets its board huge. Now, normally people just go the spirit route with Kykar, but I thought, you know what? If we're making tokens, let's have all my cards make tokens. So Young Pyromancer, Monastery Mentor, and then you're going to use effects like Zada, Hedron Grinder, or Mirrorwing Dragon. And both of them say a very similar thing, which is whenever you cast a instant or sorcery spell that only targets Zada or Mirrorwing Dragon, you get to copy that spell for each other creature I control that the spell could target. And each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So in Mirrorwing Dragon's case, it's any player, but it really is going to be you that's doing this. So what happens in this deck is you're playing a lot of cards like Shadow Rift. This is a blue for an instant, and it says target creature gains Shadow until end of turn, and then draw a card. So let's imagine you have a board of 21 ones of all different types. You cast a single Shadow Rift with Mirrorwing Dragon or Zada out on the board, and blammo, you get to copy that card for each creature you control. So 20 times, they all gain Shadow, which is this creature can be blocked or only be blocked with creature with Shadow, basically unblockable. And you get to draw 20 cards. So these little cantrips are a really fun part of the deck. And that's sort of the strategy that I went with this Kykar strategy in particular. So that's the plan. Set up the board, get one of these incredibly powerful creatures out, and then blammo. Cast any number of these spells in the deck, recur them, draw a ton of cards, and then just find a way to win from there. So focus on ramp, get Kykar and the token creators out, and really just make sure the token creators don't die. Kykar itself does a great job of getting stuff out, and so does a Young Pyromancer and Monastery Mentor, but they're huge targets for removal. So let's talk about some of the cornerstones of the deck. First up is the aforementioned Monastery Mentor. 2 and white for a 2/2 with prowess. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a 1/1 white monk creature token with prowess onto the battlefield. Prowess is especially important in this deck because it says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And Kykar also cares about non-creature spells. As a result, you'll see a lot of artifacts in the deck as well that cost 1 mana. Soul Ring triggers Kykar and Monastery Mentor, Sensei's Divining Top. These sorts of spells are great because you're going to make your board huge, and then blam, they're going to get big when Monastery Mentor is out because they all have prowess. The math is a little annoying because when you cast a spell and a token isn't out, the ones that are out will get the +1/+1, and the one isn't won't. So you have to find a way to keep track of it. I have special dice just for this deck to make sure that you can do that. But it's definitely one of those things where you're going to have to do a little bit of accounting. And so this style of deck is not necessarily for everyone, especially if you're in one of those 20-minute turns and you just want to finish the game, but you're like, darn it, I have to do the math here. I need to make sure I can kill everyone and string it all together. On your winning turns, you're usually casting like 8 or 9 spells. Mirrorwing Dragon is the next cornerstone. We just talked about it, similar to Zada, Hedron Grinder. So again, this is a creature that when you target it, Zada, or Mirrorwing, it copies that spell for every creature it could target. And so you're going to want to cast spells like Crimson Wisps, which is a red for an instant. Target creature becomes red and gains haste until end of turn. Draw a card. Pretty important, actually, when you build out a huge board that same turn to end it with the Crimson Wisps. Leap gives target creature flying until end of turn and draw a card. And Shadow Rift that we just talked about gives creatures shadow. And of course, draw a card. The cantrip part of this, or a spell that replaces itself with another card, is really important because you need to make sure that you have the gas to keep things going in this deck. And so cards like that are going to do a lot of work for you. Another cornerstone is like Lear, Disciple of the Drowned, or Mavinda, Student's Advocate. So Lear says spells can't be countered, but also each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback, and the flashback is equal to that card's mana cost. And Mavinda says you can pay 0 mana to cast target instant or sorcery spell from your graveyard this turn. If that spell doesn't target a creature you control, it costs 8 more to cast this way. If that spell we put into your graveyard, exile it instead and activate only once each turn. So Mavinda is kind of a pet card of mine because you can cast it for 3 and then you pay 0 to target any of the spells in your graveyard, for instance, like that Crimson Wisps or Shadow Rift, Cast it again, blammo, only costs 0 to activate Movinda in that case. Sometimes if you have the 8 mana, you can do it for the more expensive side, but this is kind of just like a backup to Leer, and it's a much cheaper spell to get out as well, at only 3 mana. So that's my pet card of the deck. I would also say that the usual win con in this deck is a card called Fists of Flame. It's 1 in red and it says draw a card until end of turn. Target creature gains trample and gets +1/+0 for each card you've drawn this turn. So imagine you've drawn 20 cards with 20 creatures out. Fist of Flame is going to give a ton of damage to that creature, especially if you have one of the multipliers out like Zada or Mirror-Wing Dragon, because then it's going to draw a card and then it's going to duplicate that spell a bunch of times. So yeah, Fist of Flame is usually the way you win. You don't even need to have a huge board. Sometimes you just draw a bunch of cards and you swing in with a huge 1 flyer to do it. Another win con in this deck is Angel Fire Ignition. This is 1 red and a white for a sorcery. It says put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It gains Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Haste until end of turn. And better yet, you can flash it back from your graveyard for 2 a red and a white. This card has overperformed every single time I played it. Giving a creature Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Haste means that 1, you're going to do a ton of damage, but also you're going to gain a lot of life back. And that's going to oftentimes put you in a position where you just are unassailable. People can't take you out at that point. So I love Angel Fire Ignition. Finally, if you're looking to get your Monastery Mentors and Young Pyromancers out of the deck, I run Recruiter of the Guard and Imperial Recruiter in the deck. Recruiter of the Guard looks for a creature card with toughness 2 or less, and Imperial Recruiter looks for a creature card with power 2 or less. So they're both just basically creature tutors to get my little combo pieces out. And then a card that's always on the edge of being cut for me, one that I added in recently and went, is this good enough, is Feather the Redeemed. So this is a great card by itself, but it is a little tough to cast because it's red, white, white. But it's for a 3/4 flyer, and it says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery that targets a creature you control, exile that card instead of putting it into your graveyard as it resolves. If you do, return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So again, it's another way, like Movinda and Leer, to rebuy the instants and sorceries. In this case, it doesn't exile it forever. You just got to get it back over and over again. But I've found it kind of tough, one, to cast Feather sometimes as red, white, white. And other times it's like, I have this in my hand, but it's a 3-mana card that takes up a lot of my colored mana, and I've got a lot of other stuff on to do this turn. I'm not sure I can actually make use of it. So I'd say that's right on the edge of the cutting board. All right, so my ranking for my Kykar Wind's Fury deck would be a C. So it's really fun, and it does a lot of unconventional stuff that you wouldn't expect from a Kykar deck, but it is a bit single direction. And once players sort of know what the strategy is, it can get blown up pretty easily. And board wipes are devastating for a deck like this, especially if you don't have a turn where you're able to draw 20 cards or whatever off one of your cantrips, plus you have to have the combo piece out for it to happen, and you have to have a board state. So when it does come together, it's sort of magical Christmas land. Otherwise, you're building up to something, and if you get disrupted before then, even with like a timely counterspell, it can be pretty brutal. So I put it at C because it is a deck that I like to play, but there's a chance I take it apart and maybe do something else. There's a lot of Jeskai commanders out now, and different strategies as well for Jeskai that aren't purely Spellslinger. So it may go down that route eventually. All right, next up, we have one of my oldest decks, one of the decks that has been built the most in terms of taken apart and rebuilt over and over again. It is Neheb the Eternal. So Neheb is 3 red for a legendary creature, zombie minotaur warrior. That's a 4/6. And it has the ability Afflict 3, and it says whenever this creature becomes blocked, defending player loses 3 life. And it says at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, add red mana to your mana pool for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. So this is your big red mana, huge kill spell deck that plays Neheb out, does a bunch of damage to everyone with the game plan, and then basically has like 50, 60 mana in your second main phase. You pump it onto a huge X spell, a Chandra's Ignition, whatever it is, and blammo, you are just taking out the entire table in one fell swoop. You want to go extremely fast. You want to play all your ramp pieces as fast as possible to get Neheb out before your opponents sort of have the ability to mount a defense. Ideally, you can swing with Neheb as well as cast one of the damage spells. And then bam, just hit him with a huge X spell. The cornerstones of this deck are cards that basically can do a lot of damage to everyone at one time. You don't want to be letting everyone know what's happening and then not winning that turn. Because once you do Neheb's effect once and people realize how bad it is, they probably won't let you do it again. And that's why most times Neheb just instantly gets removed or countered when he gets played. So cards like Price of Progress are great in this deck. It's 1 in red. It says, Price of Progress deals damage to each player equal to twice the number of non-basic lands that player controls. So if you're playing against like a Josh Lee Kwai that has 10 non-basic lands out, this is going to do 20 damage to them. Sometimes this just outright kills a player. But most times you're going to do this, and let's say it does a combined 40 damage around the table. Boom. You go to your second main phase, you have 40 red mana for a measly cost of just 2 red mana for the Price of Progress. Another mainstay of this deck is Heartless Hidetsugu. 3 red for a 4/3. You tap it, deals damage to each player equal to half that player's life total, rounded down. So if everyone starts at 40, this is going to deal 80 damage total, 60 to your opponents, 20 to yourself, and then bam, you get that much mana. And Heartless Hidetsugu also is great because you need players' life totals to be a bit lower, same with Price of Progress, than to hit in with that sort of big-time winning spell. Another fun one is, of course, Chandra's Ignition. 3 red, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent. So this is great because it makes Neheb kind of a board wipe. It does 4 damage across the board, and it's great to clear stuff out. Then you can crack him for damage, and then by that point, you've done 16 damage maybe at the table, and then you're going to have 16 red mana, and then from there, again, you can chain it together, put it into a ritual or whatever, and get even more mana, and blam, kill everyone. Another similar effect is Flame Rift. I love this card. 1 in a red sorcery, deals 4 damage to each player. That's it. It's an older card, so maybe they didn't think about it should just say target opponent or one opponent and you, or I don't know what the wording exactly is. But back in the day, they weren't as concerned about each opponent as opposed to target opponent because Commander wasn't really a thing back then. So I love finding cards like that that can just hit everyone at once. And then finally, some win cons. Crackle with Power is a big one. XXX red. It deals 5 times X damage to each of X targets. So again, if you have 32 red mana, you can make X equal to 10, and then you're going to deal 5 times 10 damage, so 50 damage of each to up to 10 targets. That's going to win the game. Even at lower numbers, it's going to destroy everyone, but that's definitely the type of card that kills everyone. Same with like Bonfire of the Damned. It's XX red, deals X damage to target player and each creature he or she controls, or you can miracle it for X in a red, but you're probably not going to do that because you're going to wait to basically cast it for as big as possible. My pet card in this deck is Manacism. This is 1 in red for a sorcery, and it says, sacrifice any number of lands, add 1 to your mana pool for each land sacrificed this way. I'm the type of player that loves cards like Final Fortune, which says, take an extra turn after this one. At the end of that turn, you lose the game. It puts me on the clock that says, if I can't win right now, then I don't care about winning at all. Manacism says, hey, you need that extra just tiny bit of mana? Well, look, everyone's done everything they can to stop the damage coming in from Neheb, but thanks to this Manacism, you can now sack your 8 lands, get 8 additional mana, and then pump it into an X spell, and boom, kill everyone. In terms of combos, you've heard them up pretty much already. Heartless Hidetsugu is bonkers, one of the best cards in the deck. I recently put in Lithoform Engine, which is this 4-mana legendary artifact, and you can do a bunch of stuff with it. You can either pay 2 and tap it to copy target activated or triggered ability you control, so that would be Neheb's ability, or you can pay 3 mana to tap it and copy target instant or sorcery spell you control, or you can pay 4 mana and tap it to copy target permanent spell you control. It's a bit pricey, it's at 4 mana, and sometimes you just don't have the freedom of doing this, but if you get a big Neheb turn and the Lithoform Engine out and any of those X spells that we mentioned earlier, you can do the math and you can actually do a lot more by copying an X spell sometimes instead of pumping all that extra mana. In this case, it would be like 7 mana or 3 mana with an activation if the engine's already out to just basically double the spell and do it twice as much. Now, when it comes to the ranking, out of S to F, this one actually is a straight F because since my beginning of my Commander career, I've always built mono red decks. And instead of building a new mono red deck each time, I just reform it. I just make it brand new. I make it a new Commander. It was Kiki-Jiki at one point, then Norin the Wary, and then it became Neheb the Eternal. But there's so many cards now that would make for awesome new Commanders that aren't as just like, oh, Neheb, great, gotta kill Jimmy. You've got Imodan the Pyrohammer, Virtue of Courage, Ojer Axonil, Solfim, Mayhem Dominus. They're all cards that could fit into this deck or into a new build with one of those new commanders. So there's a good chance that this changes into an Ojer Axonil deck, which is one of the new cards from Ixalan. But we'll see. You know, I haven't played this deck in a while because it's so just remove on site, but that's sort of my thinking about it right now. All right, let's move on to my next deck. This is Obuun, Mul Daya Ancestor. Let's read the card. 1 red, green, and white for a 3/3 legendary creature, Elf Spirit. At the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste until end of turn, where X is Obuun's power. It's still a land. And then landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. So this is a middle-of-the-road landfall deck that is Obuun at the center of it. And I actually originally built this deck for one of my friends, Alfred, who was learning to play the game, and I wanted to create a deck that was fairly simple. Turns out it wasn't as simple as I realized, and I ended up taking the deck back, and and he got another deck that was a bit simpler, with less colors. For a new player. So this is a deck that I built to just basically be able to hang at almost any table that it comes to. It's a land matters deck with a lot of landfall triggers, and it's all about just beating people up with giant tramply land creatures with Obuun out and pumping his power super high. So you're just swinging around damage, really basic game plan, and you win by attacking. Pretty simple. When it comes to the cornerstones of the deck, we got Morog, Fury of Akum, 4 red. Each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it is attacked this turn, and landfall, when the land enters the battlefield under your control. If it's your main phase, there is an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. Make sure you look up how Morog works before you play it, because it is confusing, and I'm not going to explain it here, but I've made mistakes with it, and so will you. Other cards that are cornerstones are the Mending of Dominaria. This is a saga. The first 2 chapters you mill 2, and then you can return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And then chapter 3, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then shuffle your graveyard into your library. So any of those effects that get, like Splendid Reclamation, that get all your lands back, because again, you're cracking fetches, Terramorphic Expanses, and that sort of stuff in the deck. Mending of Dominaria and those types of effects are great, especially when paired with Felidar Retreat. 3 in the white for an enchantment with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1. Create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, or put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control, and they gain vigilance until end of turn. Felidar Retreat is like a whole deck in itself. It basically can win the game by itself, and that's why it is so powerful in this deck. You cast it, you make a ton of tokens with your landfall triggers, and then you just start adding counters at a certain point, and they get vigilance, and they're huge, and everyone dies. Another big win con on the cornerstone of the deck would be Kamahl, Heart of Krosa. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample, but also you can pay 1 in the green to make a land a 1/1 elemental creature with vigilance, indestructible, and haste. So again, just a big win con. Get all your lands out, kill people with your lands. That's the theme of the deck. It's not really doing much else. The pet card of the deck is Trove Warden. This is 2 white for a vigilance landfall creature. That's a 3/4. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, exile target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard. And when Trove Warden dies, put each permanent card exiled with it onto the battlefield under the control of that card's owner. So you can basically exile lands with this. You can exile permanents. You can exile Conduit, Crucible of Worlds type cards with this, Burgeoning, cards that may have gotten removed earlier. And then when Trove Warden dies, they all get back onto the battlefield. Really, you're looking to just have a huge amount of landfall triggers hit at once. Now, I don't have any sacrifice outlets in the deck, so there are times when this just gets exiled and it's really sad, but it is my pet card and I like it quite a bit. Now, this deck isn't really combo-tastic. You've got Conduit of Worlds and Crucible of Worlds to help you replay lands from your deck, but really it's just trying to do landfall shenanigans. And cards like Mina and Den or Oracle of Mul Daya or Burgeoning are just ways for you to get more landfall triggers and to just get the deck going and going and going. When it comes to the ranking of this deck, I would put it at like a B. I would say that this is a deck that I bring to almost every convention I can because it can hang at most tables. It just has the ability to do cool stuff. You know, it can play lands and get a bunch of creatures out and make huge damage and make people go, oh crap, Obuun, and that land is hitting me for 15? Oh geez. And I like putting pressure on players in games in general. So this deck is one that can just usually play at most power tables, unless it's like 8s and aboves and like really high power. And for that reason, I like bringing it around because it's just fun. It's really easy to take cards in and out and slot them out when you're not super trying to focus on like making it the most ideal version of the deck as possible. And that to me is a lot of fun too. There's always going to be cards that in every set will be fun to put into the deck. And as a result, you get to just have more fun upgrading it or even detuning it and taking its power level down from time to time. So I'll be keeping this around. I'm going to constantly be noodling with it. And it's definitely one of those decks I just like having around. And unless another like really exciting landfall commander comes out, I think Obuun is just at that right power level to have fun with it and not take it too seriously. Okay, next up is Miirym, Sentinel Wyrm. So you may have seen me play this deck before on extra turns, I believe. I may have even had it have a poor showing on the game nights one time. This originally was another Temur Dragons deck, but this is the latest iteration, and boy oh boy, it's a powerhouse. It's 3, a green, a blue, and a red for a legendary creature, Dragon Spirit. That's a 6/6. As flying and ward 2 for some reason. It says whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of it, except the token isn't legendary if that dragon is legendary. So this is just probably the most busted dragon commander ever printed outside of maybe your 5-color dragons. In terms of 3-color dragons, I don't think you can get any more powerful than this. You just want to play as many dragons as possible. And legendary doesn't matter as well, so play legendaries to your heart's content. Miirym is probably on the top of the need to remove commander list outside of Neheb, what I've mentioned here. You got to get rid of it. Otherwise, the next turn you could be facing down just so many dragons, with haste usually, that you're going to die. Ideally, you kind of do it on the same turn, because if you give everyone a turn cycle to kill Miirym, they're going to try and do it. So cornerstones of the deck. Food Chain and Sneak Attack and Elvish Piper and Dragon Tempest and Niv Mizzet. Oh gosh, let's just start at the top here. Food Chain. 2 and a green for an enchantment. You exile a creature you control from the game and you add X mana of any color to your mana pool, where X is the exiled creature's mana value +1, and this mana may be spent only to play creature spells. So this is like one of the most combo-tastic cards in the deck, even though the deck isn't trying to go infinite with it necessarily. But what happens is you play a dragon when Miirym's out, it creates a copy of it, and then with Food Chain, you can exile one of the copies, doesn't matter if it's a token or a copy, add that much mana +1, then play another dragon out of your hand, create a copy of it, and then again, you have the Food Chain ability to exile one or more of those dragons, again, keep playing more and more and more dragons. So you can basically dump out your hand and never have to worry about, oh darn, I just exiled the creature I played, because Miirym, again, makes a copy. Next up is Dragon Tempest. This is like the ultimate dragon deck card as well. 1 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, it gains haste until end of turn. Pretty good when you want to win the game that turn. And then whenever dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to target creature or player, where X is the number of dragons you control. So again, with Miirym, play a dragon. Get the trigger of haste, but who cares? It's going to deal X damage to a creature or player, where X is the number of dragons you control. And you get another dragon that comes in, can count that dragon that you just played, and boom, you're doing even more damage. Dragon Tempest, Food Chain, that's the kind of interaction that just basically ends games for you. Next up, in terms of cornerstones, is one of my favorite dragons in the world, and one of the hardest dragons to cast in the world. It's Niv Mizzet Perun. This is blue, 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 red, red, red for a 5/5, can't be countered, dragon wizard with flying. Whenever you draw a card, it deals 1 damage to any target, and whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery, you draw a card. So someone casts an instant or sorcery, you draw a card, trigger, deal a damage. Now imagine having 2 of these on the battlefield. It adds up pretty quick. You draw a ton of cards, you're refilling your hand, you're just knocking creatures off the board left and right. You can have cards like Wheel of Fortune or Wheel of Misfortune in the deck, and when people wheel and the Niv Mizzet is out, oh boy, you're going to draw 7 cards, and you're going to have 2 Niv Mizzet triggers for each of those cards. Pretty nutty. And by the way, it's also whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery, so it counts you yourself as well. So pretty powerful. And of course, if you want even more Niv Mizzets, because again, copying legendaries is the name of the game, there are 2 cards that do a great job at copying legendaries. It's Irenicus's Vile Duplication, which is a sorcery, and Spark Double, which is a creature illusion. They both cost 3 in the blue, and basically you get another copy of a legendary creature, and it isn't legendary. Pretty powerful. You can sort of see where the win comes from pretty quickly here, right? Pet card in this deck is probably Final Fortune. This is red for an instant. Like I said earlier, take another turn after this one, you lose the game at the end of that turn. With decks like this, you need extra turns, and you could play your Time Warps, Expropriates, and all that stuff, but I like that Final Fortune is an instant, so you can actually get out of turn order on someone else's turn and sort of jump in there and go for the win, or you can just do it on your turn, play it, go for it again, and hopefully you have enough flyers while your opponents are tapped out. You wait for that perfect moment because you've got Sneak Attack in hand, and you're able to just swing in and just murder everyone. So, when it comes to combos, Sneak Attack and Dragon Tempest, Food Chain, those are usually the ways that you guarantee victory. And you kind of want to get there by playing like an Ancient Copper Dragon, which is going to create a bunch of treasure tokens, or have Elvish Pipers and stuff out so that you can get more than one big creature out each turn. Miirym's great because it says whenever a non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control. So it doesn't care if you cast it from your hand, if you cheat off the top of your library with Selvala Stampede or whatever. It's definitely a very powerful deck. And of course, Miirym, you gotta kill Miirym. So my ranking for this deck is a B as well. I just love dragons. I don't see myself taking apart Miirym anytime soon, and we get new dragons pretty much every single set. Sometimes you get a bunch of dragons, which is exciting. So there's always ways to upgrade it. At this point, it's sort of just a decision for me of whether or not I take its power level to the absolute max, or if I scale it back a bit and go, you know what, let's make this a little more casual. But the thing about Miirym is, it's kind of hard to have it be casual because the power level of the card is just so high. Even if you're just duplicating regular 5/5 flyers that don't do anything else, that's a lot of damage, and that's a really easy, quick way to kill people at the table. So I do love this deck quite a lot. Don't think I'll be taking it apart anytime soon, so it sits pretty high up on the list at a B ranking.
Take that, you sugary son of a... Oh, hello. You caught me in the middle of work. I'm Greta, Sweet Tooth Scourge, and holidays are my busy season. Look, I spend too much time struggling with food already, so when I get home, I want a meal that's quick, easy, and delicious. That's why I use Factor, America's #1 meal delivery service. With Factor, you'll get fresh, flavor-packed meals that show up right at your door and aren't trying to kill you. You minty moron! Yeah! Just choose from any of their 35-plus, never-frozen, chef-crafted meals that only take 2 minutes to prepare. It's perfect for a busy holiday schedule, and not just for dinner. They've got quick breakfast options, lunch to go, and even grab-and-go snacks. Personally, I'm a fan of their home-style turkey and herb gravy. You'll forgive me if I skip dessert. So get Factor and save time this holiday season without wasting money on takeout and drive-thrus. That way you'll avoid my nemesis, fast food. Can't catch me! Ha-ha! Get back here, you stupid cookie!
Head to factormeals.com/command50 and use code command50 to get 50% off. That's code command50 at factormeals.com/command50 to get 50% off.
Josh, this is an intervention.
Can it wait? I have all these resumes I gotta read.
We miss you, man. The old you, before you spent every waking moment browsing job sites.
I can't help it. I gotta hire people so that the work can get done.
The work needs you, Josh, so you need Indeed, the website where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Their hiring platform does the hard work for you, finding candidates quickly with powerful tools like Instant Match.
But how do I know they're qualified?
With Indeed, you only pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements.
So instead of spending hours on multiple job sites, you can spend hours drawing cards or making deals.
I do like drawing cards. Okay, that does it. I'm using Indeed today.
Yeah! No, okay.
Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/command-zone. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/command-zone. Just go to Indeed.com/command-zone and support the show by saying you heard about it on this podcast. Indeed.com/command-zone. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Hey, what you doing?
I wanted to give out some cool game nights gifts for the holidays this year, so I'm making custom GK throw pillows.
Nice, how's it looking?
Like this.
My God, is that our logo?
What? Drawing on pillows is hard.
Rachel, if you want heartfelt handcrafted gifts, you should just go on Etsy. Every year, I find independent sellers on Etsy to make gifts for friends, family, and business associates. Like those comfy Game Nights blankets the office got last year. I had them custom made on Etsy.
Oh, I love that blanket.
Yeah, I found cutting boards, wine stoppers. The options are endless. And for any budget, on Etsy, you're bound to find something totally unique and perfect for everyone on your gift list. We even use Etsy to make the Game Nights Live Championship belts and crown.
I won one of those.
You sure did. Do you mind if I see the pillow?
Yeah, do you like it?
I love it. It's gonna keep me warm in the winter, because I'm gonna burn it.
Josh! New to Etsy? Use the code HOLIDAY10 for 10% off your first purchase. Again, that's code HOLIDAY10. Maximum discount value of $50 expires December 31st, 2023. See terms at etsy.com/terms. For handcrafted and affordable gifts for everyone on your list, Etsy has it. Shop etsy.com.
Next up, we have one of my newer decks. It is Magnus the Red, like Jimmy the Red. This is 3, a blue, and a red for a 4/5 with flying. It's a legendary creature, Demon Primarch. Pretty badass. It's got 2 abilities. The first one is called Unearthly Power. It says instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each creature token you control. And its second ability is called Blade of Magnus. Whenever Magnus the Red deals combat damage to a player, create a 3/3 red spawn creature token. So, second part of the ability, not as relevant, but notably, if you hit someone with Magnus, you're going to make your instant and sorceries cast cost 1 less because you made a creature token called Spawn, not like the comic. This deck is here to basically drop massive, huge instants and sorceries. Ideally, you have a ton of tokens out. That's going to reduce the cost of every spell you cast, and then you're just casting stuff for free or pretty much nearly free. And there's a lot of damage you can obviously do when it comes to casting giant X spells in blue and red. There is a special theme to the deck, which is I've added in a polymorph package inspired by Manson, one of our editors here at the Command Zone. And because you're making so many tokens, it's really fun to polymorph one of your creatures into an even bigger, scarier creature, or one that just sort of helps you keep popping off. So we'll talk a little bit more about those cards in a bit, but it's a lot of fun to sort of swap out one of your tokens for a powerful card, and then everyone goes, oh no, now we have to deal with that instead, which is great because much like my other decks, Magnus the Red is a removal magnet. So let's talk about some of the cornerstones. First up, we got cards like Dragon Fodder. This is 1 red for a sorcery. It's really simple. Put 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens into play. You want to set up your board as much as possible before Magnus the Red gets out, and that means creating a lot of tokens. And just straight up token creators like Dragon Fodder, they really do the trick. Now, in this deck, I don't actually play that many of them, and that might be something I need to look at when rebalancing the deck to make sure it really flows, because it is a bit glass cannon-y right now, and again, not having an early board state sometimes can lead to a lot of damage being taken by you. And when you're a Spellslinger deck, you can't really afford to get to a really low life total and get pressured. Another cornerstone is Stolen by the Fae. This is X blue for a sorcery, and it says return target creature with converted mana cost or mana value X to its owner's hand. You create X 1/1 blue fairy creature tokens with flying. So this is great early game. It's awesome when you have Magnus out and a bunch of tokens, because then you can pay like very little mana for X, bounce someone's 6 or 7 drop and make a ton of fairies, and then bam, now all your next spells are reduced as well. So this counts as removal and ramp in this deck, so it's super crucial. Another great card is Occult Epiphany. X in the blue for an instant, draw X cards, then discard X cards. Create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying for each card type among cards discarded this way. Being able to filter your hand in this deck is really important because you have so many cards that are just wanting to be cast for 7, 8, 9 plus mana. And if you're in the early game and you don't want that, or if you're in the late game and you're searching for that, Occult Epiphany and cards like that are great because they allow you to filter through your hand, discard what you don't need, and the deck also has some graveyard synergies as well. So it's a great way to, again, just empty your hand of the stuff that you don't want and put what you want in there. Next up is another X spell. It's Muse Vortex. This is X blue for a sorcery, and it has a lot of text. Exile the top X cards of your library. You may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value X or less from among them without paying its mana cost. Then put the exiled instant and sorcery cards that weren't cast this way into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So I love this card because it's not just about finding a single card off the top. You can actually find many different cards off the top. And you don't have to actually cast an instant or sorcery from among the cards you reveal. So with X is equal to like 10 or 12, you can reveal a ton of cards, fill your hand right back up with all those X spells that you want to cast later on, and then maybe that same turn just goes straight off. Finally, we have Crackle with Power. We already talked about this card. Again, does a ton of damage. It's one of the win cons of the deck, and it's one of the ways that you're going to get the damage through because you're just doing so much with all your tokens out. Now, my pet cards in this deck, there are two of them I want to talk about. The first is Tempt with Vengeance. This is one of the oldie but a goodie cards from Commander sets way back in the day. X and a red for a sorcery. That's a tempting offer. You get to put X11 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield, and each opponent may put X11 red elemental creature tokens with haste on the battlefield. For each player who does, you put another X11 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. There have been many times. Now, the right response is, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to accept your tempting offer, Jimmy. But sometimes people want those creatures. They either have sack outlets, maybe they have a Phyrexian Altar or something on the board, and then we go, sure, why not? And when they make those tokens, you make them too, and now you're doubling up what X is. And again, it's just a huge ramp spell for your deck, and it allows you to cast cards like this next card, which is a pet card for free, Skittering Invasion. This is a 7-mana colorless tribal sorcery that says, I guess typal sorcery now, Eldrazi. It says, put 5/0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens onto the battlefield. They have sacrifice this creature, add 1 to your mana pool. So not only is this spell often going to cost 0 in this deck, you also get 5/0/1s on the battlefield that count towards Magnus's ability, and you can sacrifice each of them after you get the spell reduction to add 1 mana to your mana pool. So pretty exciting, a lot of value that can happen there. Let's talk about some of the combos in the deck. So one of the most boring combos is Alrund's Epiphany. 5 blue for a sorcery. You get to create 2 1/1 blue bird creature tokens, and you take an extra turn. It's boring, but it makes tokens, gives you an extra turn. And then that turn, you may pop off with a card like Reality Spasm. X blue. Choose one, instant. Tap X target permanent or untap X target permanents. So in this deck, I found that a lot of trouble happens sometimes when you don't have access to blue or red all the time, and a lot of these X spells want you to have that mana. So on the turn you're popping off, having a Reality Spasm at the end of the chain of a bunch of spells, you're making a ton of tokens, and then bam, you can untap everything on your board, including your lands, is what's going to give you that just amount of extra gas to get through for the damage and whatever else it is that you're trying to do. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the combos in terms of why I have the polymorph package in here. So the 3 polymorph cards I'm running are Chaos Mutation, Divergent Transformations, and Chaotic Transformation. Wow, actually, it's funny. All these names are so similar. Chaos Mutation came out in the Warhammer 40k set. It's an instant for 3 blue and a red. Exile any number of target creatures controlled by different players. For each creature exiled this way, its controller reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card, and that card goes onto the battlefield. So you could just do this to one creature yourself, or you could take out other problematic creatures, and then it kind of does like a Chaos Warpy effect. Sometimes, though, buyer beware, you're going to flip something really awful off the top of someone else's library. They may trade in a 2/2 utility creature for an Elish Norn or whatever, so you got to be careful there. Chaotic Transformation is 5 and a red for a sorcery, and it says exile up to 1 target artifact, 1 target creature, 1 target enchantment, 1 target planeswalker, and or 1 target land. And then for each permanent, you do the polymorph thing. I love this because, one, you can do it to yourself for all of them if you want, I guess, except for planeswalker. There's no planeswalker in this deck. But this is a huge removal spell if done at the right time, because it gets rid of a ton of stuff. And again, you're just hoping that the replacement card that comes up isn't worse than what happens. But if the problem card is bad enough, then you're going to want to get rid of it. The final one is Divergent Transformations. This says Undaunted, so it costs 1 less to cast for each opponent. Normally 6 in a red, probably going to be less with your commander's ability as well as the number of opponents you have. And you get to exile 2 target creatures. So again, for each of these, you can choose your own creatures. And as a result, it's really powerful. So the cards that you could find with this are, right now I'm actually working on what I want to put in here. I know for a fact that I want to add in a couple of cards. I'll talk about those in a sec. But right now, some of the hits you can get are Sakashima the Imposter. So when this comes in, you can double up your commander. Doesn't matter that it's legendary. And now you have double the spell reduction. So you can really get to a win from there. Darkside Extortionist. Going to make you a ton of treasures, going to give you the mana you need. And then Torrential Gearhulk, which is going to be able to come in and cast an instant from a graveyard without paying its mana cost. So Sometimes you can actually recast the Divergent Transformation or whatever because you're like, I don't want Torrential, I want Sakashima or Dockside. So it's kind of cool because you can have that low synergy there. And then the cards that I'm looking to put in are Ovika, Enigma, Goliath. This came out, I think, with 1 or March of the Machine. It's kind of like a replacement for Magnus the Red in a way. It's 5 red and a blue that says whenever you cast a non-creature, you create X 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens, where X is the mana value of that spell, and they gain haste until end of turn. So it could also be a win con. You can just cast a 12 drop, make 12 1/1s, and they all swing in. But it also kind of is a replacement effect for what your commander does. Another option would be like Ancient Copper Dragon. It's a creature that when it deals combat damage to a player, you roll a d20 and make the number of treasures equal to the result. Again, you need a lot of mana in this deck to make it work. So go nuts. All right. This deck, though, when it comes to where I rank it on the overall scale, I'm going to give this a C. The deck is a lot of fun, but I definitely am still having trouble tuning it to the exact power level I want it to be at. Right now, I'm kind of like edging it towards really powerful. And again, it's similar to my other decks where it's a glass cannon with the commander being out. And when the commander goes away, so does your entire strategy. So not having the commander out, it really dictates the entire game. So if Magnus is gone, it's much harder to win. I'm still trying to figure out where the balance is in here. I definitely got to throw in like a command beacon and cards like that to make sure that I can recast the commander when I need to. Maybe some bounce spells to save my commander from getting removed. But whatever it is, I'm still working on tuning it, and I don't know how long it'll stick around for. Next up, we have a real fun deck. This is Raggadragga, Goreguts Boss. So there's a lot of text on this one. It's probably the commander that people need to ask to reread the most when I play against them, which is a lot of fun. 2, a red and a green for a 4/4 legendary creature, Human Boar. It says each creature you control with a mana ability gets +2/+2. Whenever a creature you control with a mana ability attacks, untap it. Whenever you cast a spell, if at least 7 mana was spent to cast it, untap target creature. It gets +7/+7 and gains trample until end of turn. Whew. A lot of text. I recently played this on the fan episode of Game Nights and almost killed some people with it, but I didn't win that game. But it's okay. Raggadragga is an awesome deck. The game plan is a lot of fun here. This is a no mana rock deck, so there's not a single Soul Ring or Signet in this deck because I just wanted to keep with the theme of the mana dorks. The idea is that you're going to run a ton of mana dorks, generate a bunch of mana, and then blow people out of the water with huge 7+ mana drop spells. And that's also going to make your creatures really big, as well as just be really impactful, huge spells. So the game plan is ramp, get Raggadragga, play 7 drops, smack for a ton, rinse and repeat. Cornerstones of the deck. First up, we got Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. This card is just busted. 1 green for a 2/3. It's got some text at the top. We don't care about that. The second part of the text that we care about is green, tap, add X mana in any combination of colors to your mana pool, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So once you get a creature +7/+7 with Raggadragga, Selvala is able to tap, add a ton of mana. And then there are some ways to combo off of that, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Because we're going to talk about right now, it's Kyrian Ranger. It says, green mana for a 1/1, return a forest you control to its owner's hand, untap target creature, activate only once each turn. So, boom, Kyrian Ranger untaps your Selvala, you're able to generate a ton of mana, and then you're able to play huge spells. We'll talk about some of those later. Another card in the deck that's a cornerstone is one of the win cons. It's End-Raze Forerunners. This is 5 green for a 7/7, so it will trigger Raggadragga when you cast it. It's got Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, and when it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain Vigilance and Trample until end of turn. Now you might be going, Jimmy, where's Craterhoof Behemoth? And I think Craterhoof Behemoth is for babies. Just kidding. I have mostly stopped playing Craterhoof because it is such a easy, quote unquote, and common win con that I want to give myself a slightly bigger challenge. And if I know that I can win with a Craterhoof, great. I can win with a Craterhoof. If I can win with an End-Raze Forerunners, then I feel like I've actually earned the victory a little bit more. Now, no hate to anyone that still plays Craterhoof. Sometimes you just got to win games. But I've won enough with Craterhoof that I'm kind of bored of it at that point. So that's why I like playing cards like End-Raze Forerunners and Kamahl, Heart of Krosa, which we already talked about with Obuun. But again, gives your creatures an overrun effect every combat on your turn. Another really fun card that I just added to the deck recently is Zopandrel, Hunger Dominus. This is 5 green for a Phyrexian Horror 4/6 with reach, and it says, at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. So the combo here is you play Zapandrel. It's a 7 mana spell. It's going to trigger Raggadragga, give a creature +7/+7, go to combat. It's going to be +14/+14. Well, actually double. So if it's a 1/1, it'll be an 8/8, then it goes to a 16/16. Or if it's like a bigger creature, it just gets huge. For instance, if it is Raggadragga, it's going to go to an 11/11, then to a 22/22 one-shot ability, and then you can swing in with it. And the reason I like Zapandrel so much is that it doubles the power and toughness each combat. So when it's your opponent's turns and they're like, maybe I can swing at you now. No, Zapandrel's got you back, and he's just doubled up the power and toughness of everything on your board. Huge creatures, huge spells, and big-time payoffs. When it comes to the pet card of this deck, I have a couple of them. One of them is Wrap in Vigor, which is 1 in the green for an instant that says regenerate each creature you control. I just like having sort of like, oh, didn't see that coming in terms of board protection. You get to play Heroic Intervention and stuff in this deck, but I also really like Wrap in Vigor because it's just one of those cards that gets people out of nowhere, and regenerating each creature you control for just 2 mana seems pretty sweet to me, and it's an oldie but a goodie. And you also have cards like Vitalize, which is a green for an instant, and it says untap all creatures you control. So again, we have only mana dorks in this deck and no mana rocks. So a great way to get more mana is by untapping all of them. It can also sometimes catch people off guard when you have a hidden blocker that they didn't see before, but you usually don't run into that. Finally, another fun pet card of mine that I only play in this deck, and again, because I run no mana rocks, is Collector Oof, or Oofy, as some people refer to it. This is 1 in the green for a creature that says activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. This turns off soul rings. It basically makes it so no one can use their mana rocks. And look, I'm not playing mana rocks, so why do I care? When it comes to combos in this deck, there are a few cards in here that are really, really good when you get their power boosted up. So you've got Viridian Joiner and Marwyn the Nurturer. Both of them are elf druids that tap to add an amount of green mana equal to their power. Marwyn also just grows every time you play an elf, and there are a lot of elves in the deck. You also have cards like Devoted Druid, which is 1 in the green. You can tap to add green. It's a 0/2, and you can put a -1/-1 counter on it to untap it. So on the turn that you go off, you can make this +7/+7, tap it for a green, put a -1/-1 counter on it. It goes to 6/8, and then you keep doing this over and over again. And you can tap this a bunch of times at a lot of mana. I did this on the Commander at Home episode, and it was really impactful when it happened. And you also have cards like Shaman of the Forgotten Ways, which is Biorhythm on a creature. So you can pay 11 mana, tap it. Each player's life total becomes the number of creatures they control, and you activate this ability only if you have total power 8 or greater amongst your creatures, which should be pretty easy with Raggadragga. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to just make use of all that mana, and especially if you play big X spells. So those are sort of, I wouldn't call them combos so much as just sort of like what the big payoffs are in the deck. Klauth's Will is X red, and green, and you can choose one, but if you have your commander, you can choose both. You deal X damage to each creature without flying, and then you can destroy up to X target artifacts and or enchantments. So this sometimes can just wipe out every single artifact and enchantment on the board because you just have so much mana to put into X. And also if it's above 7, it's going to trigger your commander. So you can also have it be, a certain number of damage that won't kill your biggest creature, and that could board wipe and then let you swing in for the win. And then you have Awaken the Woods, X green for a sorcery, create X 1/1 green forest triad land creature tokens. Great way to build your board out super big, and then also tap those creatures the next time around if you have another turn with them. A card that I've added to the deck recently that I'm still testing out and I like a lot is Fangorn, Tree Shepherd. This is 4 green. Again, hits that 7 mana crucial mark. With a 4/10, says Tree Folk have Vigilance, and then whenever one or more Tree Folk you control attack, add twice that much green mana. Doesn't really matter this last part of the text, so I really like. You don't lose unspent green mana as steps and phases end. So being able to keep the mana around when you have extra and you aren't able to really finish out the game that moment with Selvala or whatever it is can be really useful. Of course, puts a huge target on your back, but when you have other cards like Fangorn that people need to get rid of as opposed to your commander, you can do a lot of work there. So I've avoided putting cards like Nyx Bloom Ancient and stuff in this deck because I like really working for it if I'm going to get my win going, and I feel like Nyx Bloom, Craterhoof, those types of cards kind of give it to you too easily. But I really like this deck quite a lot. I would say this deck's ranking overall is an A. It's just a lot of fun to pilot and play. It can really hang in there with really other powerful decks. And a lot of times, it just surprises people with what it does. And it always feels like it has a play. And while it is another deck that is built around its commander, you have tons of mana dorks, you're able to create a ton of mana. Being able to cast Raggadragga again isn't a huge deal. I'd say the biggest thing the deck runs into is just keeping its hand filled up. So you have a couple of cards in there to help with that. But outside of that, I really like playing this deck. I'd give it an A rank. It's going to stick around for a while, and it is my only Gruul deck, as it were. All right, next up, we're going to talk about the first deck I ever built, because it evolved into this deck. It used to be a blue-black deck, and then became Grixis. It is Marchesa, the Black Rose. And a lot of text on this one. 1, a blue, a black, and a red for a 3/3 human wizard. Has Dethrone. So whenever this creature attacks the player with the most life or tied for the most life, put a 1/1 counter on it. Other creatures you control have Dethrone. Whenever a creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. So this is kind of just like your Grixis powerhouse value deck. Lots of value pieces. The ability to steal your opponent's creatures is a big part of it. And then you're also able to keep those creatures forever if you're able to swing with them, get that Dethrone +1/+1 counter on them, or get a counter on them some other way and then sacrifice them. And then they come back under your control because of the very specific way that Marchesa is worded. One of my favorite things to do in Magic is steal other people's stuff and then sacrifice it. I just did this recently with Don Andres, the Renegade, on game nights with Professor and Voxy. It's one of my favorite things to do, and this commander is like the commander for it. Or maybe Don Andres is now. But either way, it's a lot of fun to do. It's one of my oldest sort of like strategies I've always loved to draft and play in Commander and Limited. And it's a really easy game plan. You're just getting out your value pieces, you're getting your sack outlets out and stuff, getting some consistent card draw, some scary creatures, and then you start picking apart your opponent's board either by stealing their stuff or by consistently board wiping them, and then you have this Marchesa ability that brings them all back to the battlefield. You're constantly keeping your life total pretty low so that you can always have someone to attack the Dethrone. And that's a lot of the fun of it. It's almost like a race against yourself to see if you can win before they can get you to 0. So let's talk about some cornerstone cards. We have Sower of Temptation. This is a 2 blue creature, and when it comes in the battlefield, you gain control of target creature as long as Sower remains in play. So with this and getting a +1/+1 counter on it, you can play it, swing at someone, get the counter, steal a creature when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice the creature and the Sower, or just the Sower, or actually both of them. And then if you get the creature back, great. If the Sower comes back from Marchesa's ability, you get to steal something else and do it all again. Tons of fun. And you can also play cards like Saw in Half, which is 2 in the black for an instant from the latest unset. Destroy target creature. If that creature dies this way, its controller creates 2 tokens that are copies of that creature, except their base power and toughness are half that creature's power and toughness, and you round up each time. So there's tons of ETB abilities in this deck. Being able to get multiple instances of that with a card like Saw in Half. You also have cards like Wormcoil Engine that are really fun to saw in half, or Reef Worm. And so Saw in Half is just one of those cards that gets you super tons of value, and you only really want to play it in decks where you're going to kill your own stuff because you want to double up on the ETB abilities. Next up, we have Unspeakable Symbol. This is like the classic Marchesa card. It's 1 black for an enchantment. You pay 3 life to put a 1/1 counter on target creature. For the most part, black, red, and blue don't have access to putting 1/1 counters on creatures. We've gotten a few more additions over the years, but Unspeakable Symbol is sort of like one of those old cards that's always in Marchesa decks because you just need ways to put 1/1 counters on stuff if you're unable to dethrone people, or you want to steal the creature, you can't give it haste, but you want to get the 1/1 counter on it and sack it that turn. And then, of course, you have your Ashnod's Altar, your Phyrexian Altar, your sack outlets, and then the cards like Machias the Unhallowed. 3 black for a 5/5, Intimidate. Whenever a human deals damage to you, destroy it. And then other non-human creatures you control have +1/+1 and Undying. So when the creature with Undying dies, if it doesn't have 1/1 counters on it, it returns to the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it. So this is great for your own creatures in this case. The creature is out there, you just sacrifice it in response to a board wipe or someone trying to target it with something. It's going to get back to the battlefield with the 1/1 counter on it. And then if Marchesa's out, you can sacrifice it again. You can get killed by the board wipe, whatever. But at that point, it has the counter. It will see Marchesa's ability, and it will return to the battlefield under your control. When it comes to pet cards in this deck, There are a few of them. The first up is Greater Gargadon. This is just like my favorite sack outlet ever printed. It's 9 and a red for a suspend 10 card for red mana, and then you sacrifice an artifact, creature, or land to remove time counters from Greater Gargadon. So when it finally comes in, it's just this 9/7 beater, but otherwise it's just this really interesting sack outlet that can also sacrifice artifacts and creatures or lands to get the counters off it. Sometimes you'll just be in that desperate situation where you gotta sack a bunch of stuff, and then this comes in and smacks someone for the win. Another pet card is Thalicos Deceiver. This is 3 in the blue for a wizard 1/1 that has Shadow. So it can block or only be blocked by creatures with Shadow. And you can sacrifice Thalicos Receiver, gain control of target creature permanently, use this ability only if Thalicos Receiver is attacking and unblocked. So you dethrone someone, you attack them, this gets a 1/1 counter, you sacrifice it, steal a creature permanently. This comes back because it has a 1/1 counter, you can do it all over again next turn. It's a really fun card when you get it going, and people usually go, wait, I've never seen that card before. So that's a lot of fun. When it comes to combos, I've already sort of talked about a bunch of them already, but I'll just talk about some cards that work really well in the deck that I've actually added in recently. So Uncivil Unrest is 4 and a red for an enchantment. It says non-token creatures you control have Riot, so they can enter the battlefield either with haste or a 1/1 counter. Booyah! So this is like one of the few ways to really get 1/1 counters on your creatures in these colors. And it says if a creature you control with a 1/1 counter would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage instead. So perfect card for this deck. Next up is a brand new ad. It's Rowan, Scion of War. 1 in black and a red for a creature with Menace 4/2, and then tap it and says spells you cast this turn that are black and or red cost X less to cast, where X is the amount of life you lost this turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So I'm just trying this one out. In this deck, there are lots of ways to lose life. You got your Ancient Tombs, you've got all sorts of different ways, because again, you're trying to keep your life total low. You got Unspeakable Symbol, right? You want to just get people dethroned all the time. So Rowan, Sign of War, I'm testing it out to see if it's good or not, to see if it can reduce mana value on some of my more big spells, but it does have to be black or red spells specifically. So we'll see how it turns out, but I am excited to see if it's going to do a lot of work. Another new ad would be Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And this specifically says creatures you control with 1/1 counters on them have all activated abilities of creature cards exiled with the Soul Cauldron. And you can tap the Soul Cauldron to exile a card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. So this is a colorless way to add counters, which is really exciting. And finally, I've just recently added in Talion the Kindly Lord. Gonna see if this does a lot of work. You get to choose a number between 1 and 10. Whenever an opponent casts a spell with that mana value, power, or toughness, they lose 2 life and you draw a card. So again, this deck has tons of Grixis value pieces in it. Just creatures that are very buff and very scary. And, you don't want everyone to just target Marchesa every time. So if you have a board out just of a ton of stuff and you're also stealing other people's creatures, it feels like a good way to stay in the game and alive. So I would give this deck a ranking of an A. It was the first deck I ever built, originally as a blue-black deck, and it's been tuned, depowered, upgraded, powered, and pretty much everything in between during its long history now of, I think, 9 or 10 years I've been playing Commander. After I played Don Andres and Game Nights, it just says to me that there's going to be more support for the stealing stuff theme, and that to me says that this deck's going to stick around. I really like Marchesa as a commander. Conspiracy was one of my favorite sets ever. And this is one of those decks that I know right now it's sort of in a weird place. The mana value average is pretty high. It's almost like 4. It's like 3.8 or something. You can see it on ARCHIDEKT. So I still got to do a lot of tuning around with it, replaying it, and figuring out where I want that sweet spot to be. But I'm actually fine with it being a little slower because, it's already a powerful deck as is. I don't need it to get out to a super fast start either. So we'll see where it ends up, but this deck is definitely sticking around. All right, next up, we got 4 decks left. This next one's a fun one. It is perhaps the meanest deck I have, and its name is also pretty accurate. It's the Beamtown Bullies. All right. This is 1, a black, a red, and a green for a 4/4 vigilance and haste. And it says target opponent whose turn it is puts target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard onto the battlefield under their control. It gains haste, goad it, and at the beginning of the next end step, exile it. So this is just straight up the meanest deck I have. The Beamtown Bullies can gift some really unfortunate creatures to your opponents, and they have to attack with it, so it has to go at someone else, and it can be really hard to interact with the ability. And as a result, It can sometimes just end someone's game on the spot, and not in a way where the player is going to go, wow, that was a lot of fun. Usually it's more, wow, that kind of sucks. So the plan of the deck is pretty simple. You want to fill up your graveyard with milling or discarding effects or tutors to get cards in the graveyard. Get the bullies out. It has vigilance and haste, so you can attack with it that turn and just wait. And look around the table, and the next part of the game plan is seeing as every single player tries to negotiate with you as to why they should not get that nasty creature that's in your graveyard, and just watch the chaos ensue. So cornerstones of the deck, we have cards like Hermit Druid, famously, card that I just love to play. Play a green and tap it, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a basic land card, put that card into your hand, and all other revealed cards into your graveyard. So this can mill sometimes 5, 10, 20 cards into your graveyard. It's one of the most efficient mill engines in the game. Same with Stitcher Supplier. Enters the battlefield or dies, you get to put 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. And you also got cards like Perpetual Timepiece, which taps to put top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. And a really powerful piece in this deck is Fauna Shaman. You tap it to discard a creature card, and you search your library for a creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. A lot of times you don't want to get stuck with the nasty cards in your hand, and cards like Fauna Shaman, as well as Tortured Existence, which is very similar, but just for the graveyard. You pay a black for an enchantment, and the activated ability is black. Choose and discard a creature card. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So you can reuse stuff, or you can get the stuff in there. Entomb, Unmarked Grave are both cards that can put cards into the graveyard, again, from your library. And then you have like cards like Persist and Reanimate that can get stuff out. But really, the cards you're trying to put in there are not ones that you want on your battlefield. So I'm just going to name the 2 meanest ones in the deck. The first one is Leveler. It's a 5-mana 10/10. And it says, when Leveler enters the battlefield, remove your library from the game. So that's the sort of end the game on the spot card for people, because bam, they get the Leveler from the bullies, their entire library is gone. If they draw another card, they lose the game. Not fun. But they do get a 10/10 for a turn at least. And then you also have Eater of Days, which is a 4-mana 9/8 flying trample. When Eater of the Days enters the battlefield, you skip your next 2 turns. Rough. Because this thing is goaded, it has to attack, it gets exiled at the end of your turn, and then you don't have 2 turns in a row. So that is probably the most unfair way and unfun way to lose, because at that point you just can't do anything. I've seen players live through it though and actually come back to win the game, but they were not terribly happy having to skip 2 full turns in the commander pod. That can be waiting of upwards of 40 minutes sometimes. A pet card I have in this deck that I love quite a bit is Felden of the Third Path. This is 1 red for a 2/3. You can pay 2 in a red to tap it to create a token that's a copy of target creature card in your graveyard, but it's an artifact and it gains haste, and you sack it at the beginning of the next end step. A lot of times, the sort of temporary reanimate effects end up exiling the creature so you don't get access to it ever again. And there are a lot of creatures in this deck that you actually do want out. Powerful creatures, it got a Scourge of the Throne. Because again, it's exciting to be able to create moments for your opponents where they're able to use your good creatures and do a lot of damage to other players as well. So you're going to want to have creatures that aren't necessarily all negative in your graveyard. And Felden is able to get them back out, and they go back into the graveyard, and you can do it over and over again. There are also a bunch of untap abilities in this deck, so you may be able to use Felden multiple times in a turn, and that's when the damage really starts adding up. When it comes to combos, we've sort of talked about them already. The combos are really just putting nasty things out for your opponents. Bronze Bombshell, Tempting Wyrm, Phyrexian Negator, Hellcarver Demon. These are all cards that have pretty powerful effects, and they will hurt your opponents quite a bit, especially when they're swinging them at each other. I won't read all of the text out now, but you can definitely check it out later if you want to build something of this nature. But be warned, people don't love you very much when the bullies come out and they do their thing. A card that I recently added to this deck is Sting, the Glinting Dagger. This is a 2-mana artifact equipment. It gives a creature +1/+1 in haste, and it says at the beginning of each combat, untap equipped creature. And its equip cost is 2. So this is a way for the Beamtown Bullies to be activated technically every single combat step on someone else's turn, which is pretty exciting if you have a graveyard that's filled with stuff and you want to cause a ton of mayhem. But again, once you start doing this a bunch, people will not love you too much. When it comes to the grade I would give this deck, I'd give this deck an A as well. I really like this deck. It is fun to play because of the panic that it causes my opponents, and I love instilling a little bit of chaos into the game of Magic the Gathering. And look, no one wants to get a Leveler or an Eater of Days on their battlefield, and sometimes the things that they will promise you in response to you not giving it to them are very, very fun. So you have a ton of leverage in a deck like this, and again, it doesn't work with every play group. Some play groups just hate to see it, but some play groups enjoy that chaotic factor that gets put into play when you play a deck like this, which is why I like it so much. You never really know what's going to happen, and each game I have with this always ends up with some memorable stories at the end of it.
You know what every Magic player loves? A 2-for-1.
Ugh, getting that value over your opponents feels amazing.
Yeah, 2-for-1s are great. But you know what's even better value this holiday season? Mint Mobile. Right now, when you buy any 3-month Mint Mobile plan, you can get 3 more months for free. That's 6 months of premium wireless service for the price of only 3.
Whoa, a 6 for 3? So the legends are true.
Of course, with Mint Mobile, the value's already there. Plans start at just $15 a month and all come with unlimited talk, text, and data on the nation's largest 5G network.
Unlimited? That's like going infinite.
It's easy to switch over your old phone, and if you do need a new one, you can get 6 months of free service when you buy a select device and plan, but only for a limited time.
Limited time? We're on a 2-turn clock. We gotta act fast.
Exactly. So switch to Mint Mobile today and take advantage of their best deals of the year.
You know what magic term that sounds like?
What?
A win.
For a limited time, buy any 3-month Mint Mobile plan and get 3 more months free by going to mintmobile.com/command.
Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/command.
I think it might need more card draw.
Who are you talking to? Or is that just something you say?
Oh, no, I'm on a call with Jimmy. We're building a Chatterfang deck.
Ooh, I just added Toski. That should help, right?
Whoa, the card just showed up.
Yeah, with ARCHIDEKT, you can collaborate in real time from anywhere in the world.
Changes show up immediately. You don't even have to reload the page.
So it's perfect for brewing with a friend.
This is cool, but isn't Jimmy just upstairs?
Yeah, but I'm downstairs right now.
I ain't coming downstairs. ARCHIDEKT is the best place to browse, brew, and playtest commander decks. Just go to archidekt.com/command zone to get started.
That's ARCHIDEKT.com/command zone.
Next up, we have my only mono white deck I've ever built. It is Giada, Font of Hope. So let's read the commander real fast. This is 1 and a white for a legendary creature angel. That's a 2/2 with flying and vigilance. It says each other angel you control enters the battlefield with an additional 1/1 counter on it for each other angel you already control. For each angel you already control, including the commander. And then you can tap it to add white. Spend this mana only to cast an angel spell. So this is actually an upgraded deck from the Secret Lair deck that was called Angels. They're just like us but cooler and with wings. And I instantly bought this because I've always wanted to build a deck where I could play Bruna the Fading Light and Gisela the Broken Blade as cards in the deck. And these are 2 cards that when they flip over become Brizella, Voice of Nightmares, which is just a terrifying, terrifying card to see across the battlefield from you. And I think the intention is to have one of those 2 as the commanders of the deck, but Giada is just the ultimate angel commander. So I put her as the lead singer. And it's an upgraded precon, basically. The precon is already a pretty high power level, but I thought, this is the perfect time to build a mono white deck, and I don't need to actually invest that much energy and time into it, so it's really easy to keep around and sort of have as just something in my stable. The plan is pretty simple. You usually play Giada early, and then just start ramping out huge angels, and then swinging with them. So it's a really linear deck. I would say this is the perfect deck that I have to give to one of my friends that hasn't played that much Magic or just wants a really simple game and doesn't have to think too much about what they're doing. So let's talk about some of the cornerstones. First up, we have Thalia's Lancers and Search for Glory. Both of these allow you to search for a legendary card in your library, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So they're tutors, and again, mono white needs a lot of help. And so having the ability to find some of your more powerful spells, if, for instance, like Gisela and Bruna, should you have one of them already in play, is a great way to power the deck up without making it feel too unfair. Next up, we have Kindred Boon. This is an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, and you can pay 1 and a white to put a divinity counter on a creature you control of the chosen type. And then each creature you control with a divinity counter on it has Indestructible. So angels are great. Indestructible angels are even greater, and that's what it does. Next up, we got cards like Righteous Valkyrie and Archangel of Thune. Both these cards are caring about lifelink. And there's a lot of lifelink in the deck, and one of the ways that you can really win games, again, is by gaining a ton of life and then making huge creature angels, and both of those creatures do that. Very similar to like Lyra Dawnbringer, which adds 1/1 to all your angels and then gives them all lifelink as well. And then you have a little bit of like ramp. There's tons of ramp in the deck. You got your Mind Stone, Soul Rings, and all that stuff. But one of the best cards is Starnheim Aspirant. It's 2 and a white, and it just says angel spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. This ends up reducing so much mana you spend over the course of the game. So I really like this card as well in the deck. It's one of my favorites to draw and play early. A pet card that I put into the deck is Righteous Aura. So this is 1 in the white for an enchantment, and you can pay 2 life, and it says the next time a source of your choice would deal damage to you this turn, prevent that damage. So this is a great way to not get killed by commander damage or just a giant thing that's going to come at you and murder you. It's kind of like a Maze of Ith in a lot of ways, and again, you're gaining so much life in this deck that you don't really care about paying the life with Righteous Aura, but it's one of my favorite cards to put into mono white decks. It's just a lot of fun. When it comes to combos in the deck, there aren't too many. I would say cards like Sunblast Angel, which is like a board wipe on an angel, and Twilight Shepherd, which returns cards to your hand for each card that was put there from the battlefield, are ways to sort of get a little extra value. You've got like your Emeria Shepherds in there, and just sort of ways to regrow your stuff from your graveyard to the battlefield. But it's not terribly combo-tastic. This deck is just very linear. Again, it just wants to put out creatures and smack face with them. Some new cards I put into the deck are the Archivist of Ogma, which I'm still kind of iffy on. This is 1 and white for a flash creature. Whenever an opponent searches their library, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Mono white, we need the help. But this has, I'd say, been functional and helpful about 50% of the time. So it's kind of on the cutting block right now. But the card I really do like in this deck is Minas Tirith. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary creature, which is pretty easy in this deck to have. And you can pay 1 in the white to tap it and draw a card, activate if you attacked with 2 or more creatures this turn. And then the card that is a very good card, just in general, in any deck you can put it into, is the One Ring. It's going to drain you for some life, but it's also going to draw you a ton of cards. And like we said earlier, this is a deck that has a lot of lifelink, so it's going to do the job. I would actually give this deck let's put it at a D right now. I had it marked a little higher on my ranking, but I was thinking about it, and there may be a lot of fun mono white commanders that come out between now and the future of whatever this deck is. It doesn't mean that I'm going to take it apart, but I definitely wouldn't be opposed to seeing a situation where I'm like, oh, cool, I can still have the angel theme, but not play into it as heavily. And I can sort of modify it to do something else instead. So I want to keep myself open to that option. But I do really like this deck in terms of just having a deck to give to a beginner player and just giving them something that they know they can play. They don't need to worry about fetch lands and all these different colors that fix their mana. They can just play mono white and be happy with it. All right. Next up, we have perhaps my favorite deck that I've ever built. And it also happens to be one of my most powerful. The second to last deck we were talking about today is Pako and Haldan, the partners. So let's read them out. First up, we got Pako, Arcane Retriever, Bark, Bark, Bark. Pako is 3, a red and a green for a 3/3, legendary creature Elemental Hound, and it partners with Haldan, Avid Arcanist, which we'll read in just a second. Pako has haste and says whenever Pako attacks, exile the top card of each player's library and put a fetch counter on them. Put a 1/1 counter on Pako for each non-creature card exiled this way. So lands, enchantments, planeswalkers, instants, sorceries all count as non-creature cards. So Pako can swing in as a 3/3 and sometimes connect as a 7/7, which is pretty mean. And he just gets bigger every time he barks and attacks. His partner is Haldan, Avid Arcanist, 2 in the blue for a 1/4 legendary creature human wizard that partners with Pako. You may play non-creature cards from exile with fetch counters on them if you exiled them. And you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So really exciting. If you exile lands, you can play them. And if you don't have the mana colors, it doesn't matter because you can spend mana as though they were any color. So Pako fetches, Haldan retrieves. And the cool thing about this is that you don't actually have to play Haldan out early. You can have Pako swing it a bunch of times, he gets removed, and then you have all these cards with fetch counters. Then Haldan can enter the battlefield and give you access to all of those cards at once. So the plan for this deck is pretty simple, and why I like playing this deck is similar to Marchesa, which is I just like playing other people's cards. It's a lot of fun to me. This deck does exactly that. And a lot of times those cards, if they're non-creatures, can be pretty darn spicy. This deck is also tuned to be fairly competitive. I would say this is like at an 8.5, 9. Not fully all the way there because it doesn't have as much interaction. But it's more just about getting Pako out, getting a ton of cards to play, and then just wreaking havoc, watching the fireworks go off once Haldan comes out as well. Pako gets off to a pretty fast start and is definitely a magnet for removal, but because he has haste, he's basically always something that players have to contend with, which is really exciting. I've recast him like 4 or 5 times in the game before, because again, you have the ability to play other players' lands, so you're really never missing land drops, which is something I am, of course, famous for doing. And then you're just able to just keep the engine going. So let's talk about some cornerstone cards. The first one is Seedborn Muse, or Wilderness Reclamation is a similar card here as well. Seedborn Muse says untap all permanents you control during each player's untap step. And when you're exiling non-creatures from your opponents, oftentimes you're exiling instants. And so being able to untap everything and then bam, have access to all of these instants makes Seedborn Muse a very powerful card in this deck. And you're just able to cast, 4 or 5 spells every turn rotation as a result. Next up, we have one of the win cons. It's Aggravated Assault. So 2 in a red, and you can pay 3 red to basically untap all creatures and get an additional combat phase. Because Pako gets bigger every single time he swings, he can often become just the thing that murders everyone. So if you have ways to generate extra mana, if you have ways to basically repeat this effect over and over again, or even just activate it 4 or 5 times in a single turn, because again, you have tons of mana and tons of flexibility with this deck, it's a great way to win the game, and it's a great way to just have Pako smack everyone a billion times. Next up, we have a couple of cards that put cards on top of players' libraries. So you want cards to actually go there because of how Pako works. So let's say there's a creature that you want to exile, but you can't do it. You don't want to kill it either because the opponent's got some graveyard synergies. Well, just cast Submerge. 4 in the blue, and if an opponent controls a forest and you control an island, you may play this card without paying its mana cost. And it's an instant that says put target creature on top of its owner's library. So, troublesome creature, throw it on top of their library, swing with Pako, it gets exiled with a fetch counter on it, and they ain't seen that card ever again. Memory Lapse is 1 in the blue for an instant to counter a spell, and then you put that spell on top of its owner's library. So in this case, you can counter a non-creature spell with something like Memory Lapse, throw it to the top of their library, fetch it out with Pako, and then have access to it later, which is super convenient. Because the way that Haldan works, you can grab counter spells and stuff off with Pako and cast them, again, when you choose to, because it's an instant. Another cornerstone of the deck is Summer Bloom. This is an oldie but a goodie. 1 in a green, sorcery, you may play up to 3 additional lands this turn. Sometimes you just exile a bunch of lands with Pako, and that's totally okay because with cards like Summer Bloom and the Oracle of Moldiah type cards, you can just play your lands out and other players' lands as well, and all of a sudden you've ramped further than anyone else has this game. You just have tons of lands in play, and it feels pretty darn good. Another cornerstone would be Fury Storm. This is 2 red for an instant. When you cast a spell, copy it for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone. You may choose new targets for the copies. And it just says copy target instant or sorcery. You may choose new targets for the copy. Because you have partner commanders, and Pako is one of those cards that you're going to cast a lot of times, you can always pretty much have this be at 2 times you've cast your commander from the command zone, because it counts each of your partners every time you've cast it. Again, this is a great way to go over the top and just obliterate people with a spell that you get 5x of or whatever. Okay, a pet card in this deck is Oblivion Sower. I just love this card in the deck. It's a 6 mana 5/8 Eldrazi. When you cast Oblivion Sower, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of their library. Then you may put any number of land cards that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. So, if you've been swinging with Pako all game and one player just has exiled, let's say 3 or 4 lands off the top of their library, when you cast Oblivion Sower, it's going to exile more cards, you're going to see more lands, but every land you've already exiled with fetch counters counts towards Oblivion Sower's ability, so all of those lands enter the battlefield under your control. It's a really satisfying thing when it happens, and boy oh boy, it's a lot of fun. People usually don't see that kind of effect coming, and it's a big time effect because, again, you need a lot of mana in this deck to really do what you need to do. Another pet card I wanted to mention is Codex Shredder. When I first built this deck, I built it as an under $50, I think it was under $50 or $100 budget challenge. And Codex Shredder was one of those cards where I was like, you know what, this is actually pretty darn good. It's a 1 mana artifact. You can tap it to put a target player puts a top card of their library into their graveyard. So it can sometimes also hose someone that's tutoring to the top of their library. And you can pay 5 mana and tap it to sack it, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So I just like this as being one of those ways to just slowly fill up your graveyard across the course of the game and then eventually cash it in when you need it most. I also play like Noxious Revival and stuff in this deck. And so being able to get something back that is really important or replay a spell that has a ton of effects is where you want to be. So in terms of combos, you have cards that put basically cards on top of their library. That's like one of the best ways to get rid of stuff or to get it accessible to you. Hinder is a spell that allows you to do that. Expel from Orazka is a spell that also lets you to do that. I like both of those. I will also note that Vedalken Orrery, this is one of my few decks that I actually play Vedalken Orrery in. In fact, in this entire list, I think this is the only deck out of these 11 decks that has an Orrery in it now. Because a lot of times you exile sorceries from people's libraries and you want to be able to cast those or enchantments or planeswalkers or whatever at instant speed. So having an Orrery or a Leyline of Anticipation allows you to do that. And that to me is very exciting. Okay. I'm going to give this deck an S. It is my favorite deck that I have, I think, because it's my most competitive, and it also is the most varied. Every single time I play this deck, it is a new experience. There's always a cool deck at the table that it interacts really well with. Sometimes it just fizzles because it's playing a creature-based deck that doesn't do anything when it exiles the cards off the top of its libraries. But it doesn't really matter. I just like how it always changes, and it's got a ton of play to it. And because of the way that the game evolves, the deck's never going to have the same game twice. And that's exciting because if someone else brings a new deck to the table, I also get a taste of playing that deck with Pako and Haldan. It also wins a lot, so that definitely adds a little bit of my happiness to it. All right, let's talk about my last deck on the list. It is a Lord of the Rings deck. You may have noticed that I've actually put a lot of Lord of the Rings cards into my other decks, and I really love this set because it just had a ton of stuff that you can do in terms of adding cards to decks and stuff. And this deck is actually probably of all my decks the one that takes the most game actions. It's Samwise Gamgee. This is green and white for a halfling peasant 2/2. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token. Sacrifice 3 foods, return target historic card from your graveyard to your hand. So legendary creatures, artifacts, and sagas. So this is a really super-de-duper value-based deck. And it's all about creating a ton of food tokens with Samwise every time you have creatures enter the battlefield. And then using those for value to either bring stuff back, recur them, and constantly use them over and over again. Or just beat your opponents down with some sweet Vorthos synergy. So the plan is pretty simple. You just get Samwise out, and you just build your board state, get all of the food tokens out, and then hope to play some of the really powerful cornerstones that allow you to just get extra value. And from there, beat people down with some iconic characters from Lord of the Rings and get a bunch of value. And recover from board wipes too, which is great. Also, the food tokens can sometimes save your butt because it gains you a lot of life. All right, let's talk about some cornerstones. First up, we got Jaheira, Friend of the Forest. A lot of these cards I mentioned today, you will have seen played on the Lord of the Rings game nights as well. So if you want to see the deck in action, that's a great place to look at it. Jaheira is 2 and a green for a 2/3 that says tokens you control have tap, add green mana. So that's every single one of your food tokens are now mana rocks. Jaheira is probably one of the most powerful cards in the deck because it just blows things up in terms of how much mana you can make. Now you're just playing huge spells and going off, and it's pretty awesome. Next up is another card that did a ton of work on game nights. It's Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle. So this is 3 and a white for a 2/2. Flying, whenever you cast a historic spell, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So I have a lot of under 3 mana value cards in this deck, and almost all the creatures are historic because of Samwise's ability. So you also have artifacts that count as historic as well. So it's just a great way to recur stuff. And again, when you need something to come back, when you need another Lorn of the Third Path to destroy another artifact or whatever, this is a great way to just get that engine going. Another cornerstone would be Academy Manufactor. 3 mana, 1/3. If you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, instead create one of each. Holy moly, this is a 3-for-1, a token tripler. Treasures are obviously very important. Clues are pretty great too. It's just card draw. And if you have a Jaheira out, oh boy, all of these tokens tapping for mana. It gets out of control pretty fast. And then finally, we have a Lord of the Rings rebranded card. It's Cloudstone Curio, also known as Elisar the Elfstone. 3 mana artifact. Whenever a non-artifact permanent enters the battlefield under your control, you may return another permanent you control that shares a permanent type with it to its owner's hand. So there are a lot of ways to basically get a ton of enter the battlefield abilities, triggers over and over again. Being able to bounce stuff constantly also helps a lot for cards like Teshar. And as a result, this is just one of the more powerful combo pieces in the deck. If you have all 4 of these cards out at once, oh my goodness, you're going to be doing some ridiculously powerful stuff with Samwise Gamgee and taking like 80 game actions per turn. So it's great because this deck is sort of never in danger, right? There's always a way for this to get back and you just start pumping out value and doing a ton of really sweet stuff. And these 4 cards really help contribute to that. When it comes to pet cards, one of my favorite cards in the deck is Sarenth Steelseeker. This is a 1 in the green, 1/2 Human Artificer Scout. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you don't put the card into your hand, you may put it into your graveyard. Wow. So you play this card, you get a food token, and you basically just start either surveilling stuff to the graveyard or drawing it into your hand. So I had Sarenth Steelseeker in a single turn like get me through like 5 or 6 cards out off the top of my library. And it's great if you get stuck with like a rut of a bunch of lands in a row, but it's just an awesome card to just keep your hand refueled. And again, because Samwise has the ability to get stuff back from the graveyard, you're totally fine putting stuff in there. Another pet card is Shigeki Jukai Visionary. This is a 1 in the green for a 1/3. Josh also loves this card. You can pay 1 in the green, tap it, return it to its owner's hand, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield, tapped, and the rest into your graveyard. And you can also channel it for XX green, discard it, return X target non-legendary cards from your graveyard to your hand. And Shigeki is legendary as well, so you can get it back with Samwise. Again, lots of loops that you can make with cards like this. You can even play it early and bounce it with the Cloudstone Curio, or you can just tap it to return it and just fill your graveyard up. Basically get a ton of value that way. And then you have combos in this deck. So again, Cloudstone Curio and Flicker effects. I've got Emil the Blessed in the deck, Gilrain, Dunedain Protector. These are just ways to just reuse those enter battlefield abilities and again, just get a ton of value. A card like Samwise the Stout-Hearted, which is a flash 2/1 for 2 mana. When it enters the battlefield, choose up to 1 target permanent in your graveyard that was put there from the battlefield this turn, return it to your hand, then the ring tempts you. When you have this and Elisar out or Gilrain or Emil, you can basically just take tons of game actions. Something goes to the graveyard, you bring it back, it's a fetch land. I did this with like a Horizon Canopy and brought it back like 5 times in a single game and just kept sacking it to dig through my library. Samwise is great because it cares about permanence. And again, you're going to have stuff in the graveyard. You're going to have stuff to be able to put it into the graveyard. It's just a really, really powerful interaction with all the other combo pieces. I would say this ranking of this deck is at an S as well. Maybe an A, but I'll say S because it's a Lord of the Rings deck. And the really fun part about it is that you've got cards like Farhaven Elf, Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Ring to Barahir, which is sort of the Animist. And they've all been rebranded with Lord of the Rings art. So it feels like you're playing a really thematic Vorthos deck, and you don't actually have to sacrifice a ton of slots to just powerful Magic cards. Now, I know all the cornerstones I spoke of were all basically from the Magic universe, but the exciting part about this deck is that it feels like I'm playing Lord of the Rings, the card game, as Magic the Gathering. You've got Aragorn in there, you've got all your sort of favorite heroes and stuff, Gandalf. And so I like the feel that it has, and being able to play a deck like this with someone that doesn't really know Magic as well is a really fun experience too, because they get to go, whoa, wait, you're playing what? And doing what? And it just feels like you're playing with the cast of Lord of the Rings on the good guy side, and you're able to pull off really impressive stuff by being powered up by Magic's powerful creatures instead of having Magic creatures be the main part of the deck. So I really like the deck. It takes tons of game actions. It's never out of the game, and I've actually won with it a surprising number of times, even though I would say the deck's power level isn't that high. So yeah. All right. That wraps it up, everyone. That's going to be all 11 of my decks. Let's talk about what I learned. The first takeaway when I started going through this is like, wow, I really like to build decks that are focused really around the commander. Ultimately, though, I think like when I build my decks and I see what they're doing, there are very few counter spells. There are very few extra turn spells. I'm really looking to have like a fun time at the table. And there's different ways of doing it. There's ways that are just like, You know, the Beamtown Bullies are an unfun way to have fun at the table for some people, but I love the chaos that ensues. I really like playing Pako and Haldan because I get to play other people's cards. Marchesa is a similar thing as well. Samwise Gamgee is like, again, it's a fun thing to do at the table and have all this out. I'm usually just never focused, though, on hard control or stopping other players from doing what they want. My more powerful decks will have some counterspells in them, like Pako and Haldan and stuff, but typically it's to protect my win con instead of stopping other people. And I've noticed that I've only kept a few decks over the years from what I played on game nights or what I really built for game nights. And I'm just pretty selective about what I decide to keep playing. And I do move on from a lot of stuff pretty quickly. But I think when a deck sticks, it really does. And I tend to keep it together for a long, long time unless it's really not speaking to me anymore. And speaking of which, I've started to disassemble a few of my older decks, and one of the decks I played on early game nights was an Anafenza, the Foremost deck that was a token-based deck, and Anafenza was just a commander that had Graveyard Hate on it, so it wasn't really a token commander. I just built around the Abzan shell, and now that I've sort of taken that deck apart, I'm like, wait a minute, I can actually still have the token deck I wanted, and I can keep the theme going. I can actually put the new Frodo and Sam as partners of that deck because they're Abzan and they have card advantage built onto them as well as some life gain. So I'm actually rebuilding that deck to be more themed around having those two as the lead singers and then also the rest of the deck still having that sort of token theme to it and a little bit of life gain in there to trigger Frodo's ability. So I like doing that. I like taking apart old stuff and building it again so it feels fresh and new. So those are sort of my big takeaways from this. But of course, to the listeners, what do you think about my 11 decks? Did I surprise you with anything? Are there any decks that you want to build now after having seen me build all of these? Is there any hot tech that you think I'm missing in my decks? I would love to see what your recommendations are for making my deck spicier and sort of in the Jimmy Wong theme of things. There's always cards to cut from every single deck. I've told you also some of the new cards I put in here as well. And of course, let us know, is there someone at the Command Zone that you want to see go through their decks next? I'm pretty sure I know what the answer is, but I'd love to see what number 2, number 3, number 4 choices are for you all out there as well. And of course, if there's anything that we can do to improve this episode, is there something that you wanted us to say but we didn't do? Let us know, and make sure you go to the bottom of the Show More button under the video. It's going to have a link to all of the ARCHIDEKT links for all of the decks that I talked about today, so you can get a closer look at what's inside them and all of the other spicy tech that I've got inside, because obviously I can't talk about every single card in these decks. This episode is already running a little bit long. But before we go, let's give out one more big shout out to our sponsors. First up, we have cardkingdom.com/command. That's the place to go if you want to pick up any of these new commanders or any of the sweet new cards that I talked about today. Maybe you've got some cards that you want to add into your decks now that you're inspired by this episode. Or maybe you watched the episode with Rachel and you have some cool cards you want to add as well. Cardkingdom.com/command is the place that we trust to get all of our cards to us on time and in the condition that we want. They got a great warehouse full of a ton of cards, and they also ship everything to you in one convenient package. So you get it all at once, you can crack it open, and blam, you're playing with that deck the same night that you got it, should you want to, at cardkingdom.com/command. And of course, when you get those cards and you're collecting and protecting, head on over to ultrapro.com/command. They always have a ton of sales going on at the site. They also have a ton of just great product that are tied to things like Secret Lairs and the new set releases. So if there's some special art that you're like, wow, I just saw this card come out, I really want the art for it on the playmat, there's a chance that ultrapro.com/command has it. And some stuff is limited time as well. So make sure you check that out. I know for a fact that they just got rid of, finished selling all of their playmats from the last Secret Lair and just started selling stuff from the new one as well. So check all that stuff out. It is the place to go for playmats, sleeves, deck boxes, dice, and more. ultrapro.com/command. All right. Big thanks to our amazing team here at the Command Zone. I've got Damon Lenz, who is actually sitting across from me right now, monitoring the episode. You can't see him waving, but he just waved. Eric Lem, Megan Yip, Gaurav Galati, Jordan Pridgeon, Jamie Block, Arthur Meadowcraft, Lanson Lung, Josh Murphy, Jake Boss, Sam Wallow, Evan Limburger, Katie Cole, Mitch Trafford, Josh Lee Kwai, and of course, Rachel Weeks. So thanks so much to everyone here at the Command Zone. Thank you so much for sticking it through this episode. Let us know what you think in the comments, and we will see you later. Bye-bye, everyone.
For your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com or ask us on Twitter @JFWong and @JoshLeeQuai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.